Building Blocks Podcast, your go-to source for intriguing insight and inspiration about the future that will be built on Bitcoin and blockchain. Music courtesy Nick Valinsky, nickvalinsky@gmail.com. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Building Blocks Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Bledsoe, and today I am honored to have someone famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, Dr. Craig Stephen Wright. We are very, very privileged to have gotten some of his time to have a conversation today. Thank you, Dr. Wright, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So my original idea for this podcast, because we've had some really fun debate-ish type exchanges on LinkedIn, was to kind of get into some of those topics where I know we disagree a little bit, because there's some topics on which we very profoundly agree. And it's more fun. It's always more fun to me to have a conversation about something I disagree with someone than it is something I agree. But when I asked people, what would you do if you could ask Satoshi Nakamoto one question? Universally, it seems what people are most interested in is you personally. So I thought I'd just like kind of get into your story a little bit. And then if we have some time after we do that, I'd like to get into maybe some of the things where I know that we disagree. So my personal preamble here. So this is the man that I believe to be Satoshi Nakamoto. It only took me a few hundred hours of research to come to that conclusion. And it wasn't the Wired and Gizmodo articles that convinced me, because I'm always suspicious when I'm told to believe something. I'm always suspicious. Why is someone telling me to believe this? And I have to go and confirm it for myself. And so over time, I became convinced. And I'm happy to give, I don't want to get into a lot of that evidence right now, but I'm happy to do that if people want it. You just let me know. I'll tell you what convinced me. But I certainly believe that Dr. Wright is the inventor of Bitcoin, is the author of the white paper. And I also believe that Bitcoin is the most significant innovation since the opening of the internet, because it's another collaboration layer. The opening of the internet gave us the possibility of ultra-wide scale collaboration and just changed the game in terms of the number of ideas that could be tried and floated, and lowering barriers to entry to markets. And now Bitcoin does the same thing again, but exponentially lowers them as a shared data layer, with an economic incentive structure that will make it stable and valuable over time. I'm convinced that it's the future. Now, when I was, I actually gave up on Bitcoin at a certain point. I personally became aware of the white paper around 2011, right about the time that Satoshi Nakamoto kind of went away. I kind of became aware of the white paper and started just following it with interest. My personal life was in a bit of turmoil, and I didn't have a lot of energy to put into it. But I did set up a laptop and try to mine a little bit, and did not find a block. But it was a fun experiment. I think I burned out my laptop on that. But it was fun. And I just followed it. I just kept following it. And then over time, it became apparent that it was not going to be the thing that had interested me in the beginning. It kind of went a different way. The incentive structures were getting progressively wrecked, which were going to take the long-term value out of it. And so I kind of sold all of the things that I had accumulated, gave up on it, stopped paying attention to it, took my career in other directions. And then it was after that, actually, I think that you were outed, you were doxxed by Wired and Gizmodo. Well,
I'd actually say it was doxed by Ira Kleiman, because he was the one communicating, which I didn't actually find out until the Florida court case, where I got all the evidence of him and hundreds of different email accounts where he was talking to everyone and doing.
Yeah, I think I was going to get into that. I think that he is by far the one with the most incentive to to try to out you, but also to put Dave front and center in the story, which both Wired and Gizmodo did. So I want to get into that, but I actually came back around. It was actually during the pandemic. I helped build a business and I sold it, and took a payout, and was going to go back for capital to try to build something else. And that's when I left the business in February of 2020, and then in March 2020 the world stopped. And it turns out it's a really bad time to get capital when the economy is shrinking by 33% a quarter. So my plans changed. I had a little time to think and look around a little bit, looked back at crypto, saw there were some really interesting developments that I hadn't really been as tuned into, like BSV. And Bitcoin Satoshi vision was back to kind of proposing the things that I thought were interesting about it in the first place, something that levels the playing field. That's what I was most interested about, something that opens up opportunity and levels the playing field, takes out rent-seeking middle people from being stoppers and gatekeepers. And that is the vision that has always attracted me to it. And so the thing that really, really stood out to me in the white paper, the thing that intrigued me the most, is that most people don't understand the importance of the incentive structures in anything that you do.
I agree there. Yeah, it's an economic system more than anything else. So, I mean, the concept here is to reduce fees as low as possible. The bit that Adam Back said, a race to the bottom, which is good. Race to the bottom helps consumers. More consumers being aided in the lower price. The reduction in COSI and transaction fees and costs, and the closer we can get to an efficient economic system.
I'm building in competition is so critically important, where people have to compete for my transaction data, they want me to put my data on chain. They want me to use them to do it. They want me to pay them for it. That's just so critically important. And the proof of work. To me, proof of work is kind of like Lockean social contract theory, in that people keep trying to improve on it, but every time they try to improve on it, they just go backwards. They just erode what is right about it. And so the proof of work is so critical in terms of building a stable system with the right economics. And I was just fascinated by this. And it was so aggravating to watch all these arguments.
It's actually, to interrupt, I mean, it's a little bit different than people think. It's not just hashing. It is the entirety of it all. So it is signature verification, it is forming blocks. I mean, proof of work is really all of that, and then finding the hash solution. And at scale, the validation of signatures will actually take up more CPU time. So when I said CPU time, I do mean CPU time, because it will regress back to that. So you might have some ASICs out there, but without CPUs grinding all of the transactions, which will end up being more than 50% of the cost, then you're not going to be earning fees. So it really is different to BTC, because when you cap things at 4 or 5 transactions a second, you don't have the same dynamics of how you sort of create blocks.
Yeah, 100% true. And that's what was so aggravating to watch, the kind of the systematic destruction of this incentive structure. And that's kind of why I just kind of rage quit, the whole ecosystem for a while, because it was just, I couldn't believe people didn't understand, but I didn't really have the time to invest to get super involved, to try to kind of get things to try to give my nudging to push things back in the right direction. So I just kind of gave up. So I was very grateful actually when, that you came back, and, and I do want to get into that too. But first, so when I became aware that Bitcoin was a thing, you were kind of already stepping back as Satoshi Nakamoto. So why did you make the decision to kind of fold up the tent on the Satoshi pseudonym?
Well, I didn't really. I just wasn't in the front line. So in the background, I kept going with everything. And by 2013, I built a company in Australia with 53 staff, developers, etc., and they're working on problems of scaling. So no one actually knew that I had the biggest Bitcoin company in the world in 2013. The problems I had needed to be fixed first of all. I mean, I was going through a breakup and a divorce, so needed to get that out of the way. That also took away some of my focus. And on top of that, I had the Australian Stock Exchange, the Australian Tax Office, arguing with me about whether Bitcoin was real and a hobby and all sorts of fun things. I put an R&D claim in to the tax office for some of the different areas associated with Bitcoin and the blockchain that I was developing in 2009. And the tax office argued that this thing would never make any money, it was a complete joke, and that my claim therefore shouldn't go through. Even things like my electricity expenditure, they argued that it was all a hobby and I shouldn't be able to deduct them. And I think my power bills for the first year were probably, they're in the tens of thousands of dollars for running all the computers. And of course, they were arguing that I was probably running a grow off and silly things like this. So eventually, I ended up in court by the end of 2013, and I won. But of course, by then, Bitcoin had already hit $100 US. So the tax office then had a hard argument trying to say that this is worthless, it will never be worth anything. Then they came at me from the other side saying, now you tried to hide the fact that it will be valuable, and you know how the tax.
So let me just say, so for the listeners, the Australian Tax Office works weirdly, where agents kind of get commission on what they collect, which was shocking to me to find out. I didn't find that out until the Florida trial, which I followed fairly closely. And the Florida trial, for people who don't know, was where Ira Kleiman, on behalf of his estranged brother, Dave Kleiman, sued Dr. Wright in order to get half of his Bitcoin holdings, and failed miserably, and kind of tried to say that Craig was a forger, but it actually turns out that Ira is the forger, or someone is a forger, probably Ira. Ira has allegedly the most incentive to do so.
Well, even some of the documents weren't necessarily forged. I mean, one of the things I explained was we had a corporation, and like my EA at the time, Vivica, would take paper copies and rescan them. And if you scan a document to PDF, it's not going to have the original date but that's normal backup practice. Here I have a paper copy, I scan it later, I get a later date. But that doesn't mean anything about forging.
Yeah, I mean, fair, but there was one particular email that it was alleged that you had written, but then it turns out, based on the metadata, that you could not have written it, but Ira could have. Yes. And that's what I mean when I say, and once someone is caught in something like that, then you kind of have to take a double look at everything they say and do after that.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point. Where's the money, and where's the trail of it go? And when you've got someone suing another person to get billions of dollars, then they've got an incentive to try and fiddle with things. I mean, from my point of view, the simple answer would have been just to go in the beginning and say, no, I'm not Satoshi Nakamoto, and the case would have gone away.
Right. And that's the next thing I really wanted to talk to you about is, so you were had moved more to the background, had sort of retired the Satoshi Nakamoto pseudonym, and then you got doxxed by Wired and Gizmodo, probably tipped off by Ira Kleiman, who also put Dave in the story, probably to a greater degree than he was, but Dave was there because he was your friend and so he was around, but not in the way that Ira, it seems to me from the evidence in the Florida trial, not in the way that Ira tried to make it seem so. But at first,
the way I would put it is Dave was my best friend, and I wanted Dave to be heavily involved, but unfortunately Dave was very sick. And he didn't tell me how sick. I mean, I would have tried to help him more if I'd known, but that's the type of person he was. He didn't talk about these things. So, unfortunately, because he was ill, he wasn't able to do everything that would have been sort of him being integrated into the project. But I still wanted him.
Yeah, male pride is a hell of a thing, isn't it? I know a little bit about this, not telling people how bad things are. When my life was just basically fell apart, I didn't tell anybody. Not even my parents really knew. So that resonates with me. And then...
Well, I mean, I did the same in 2011 when my marriage was falling apart, when I was fighting with the tax office. They were trying to bankrupt me, and I didn't go around telling people. I mean, I didn't ask for help. I didn't say, hey, look, the tax office is filing bankruptcy against me to try and close down my court case so that I wouldn't be able to win it. I didn't sit there going, hey, my marriage is falling apart because of all this. But that's part of us being mad.
Yeah, there's some hard lessons I've learned about, you know what, just tell people that, like, suck it up and take some help when you need it. It's tough. It's tough. It really, really grinds you down a little bit. But I don't know, you get older, you get wiser, hopefully, which, like my wife was asking me so I get excited about things and I just talk about them, and my wife tolerates it. Me talking about random things that she has very little interest in. And so one of the things during the Florida trial, I was just very interested in it. And so I just talk about it sometimes. And she'd smile and nod, and she would ask me, so what kind of person is Dr. Wright? And I said, so he's got a little, he's seems to be on the spectrum a little bit, like, you know, what we used to call Asperger's. Now we call it like on the high functioning end of the autism spectrum. So that gives him a low tolerance for certain things. So he comes across as a little grumpy and curmudgeonly sometimes. But he's super smart and, you know, really determined, and, you know, maybe gets a little bit of a bad rap. And she says, well, I see why you like him. And I said, what do you mean? She said, game recognized game. And I was like, oh, snap. Are you calling me grumpy and curmudgeonly? She's like, well, I wouldn't be the first, would I? I was like, oh, no, that hurts a little bit, but okay, I can take that. So yeah, a lot of your story is like, it really resonates with me, personally. You know, kind of like having to like step back, not quit, but just reload. That I've had to do that a couple of different times. And the real key, I always tell my kids, the real key in life is don't give up. Just like rework your plan. Yeah. The half of life is just keep showing up. Put yourself in a position for good things to happen, and over time, more good things will happen than bad. You know, like, so, and your story is, to me, a really good example of that. You know, and I feel like you're very misunderstood, being, you know, people have certain expectations of what people are supposed to be based on sort of societal norms. And so for me, I have pretty bad ADHD. And it took me a while to figure out that other people's expectations really made my ego take a beating, because I couldn't always meet them. I couldn't always do the thing people wanted me to do. But if I could work my life where I could follow my interest, where I could utilize that hyper focus as a superpower, that I could do some really interesting things. I could turn up some really interesting insights that other people didn't think deeply enough to get. And I feel like you're like the avatar of doing that. You've kind of like used your neurodiversity as a superpower to do things that no one else really could do.
Well, it enables, like you were saying, about hyperfocus. I mean, this is an area that I've discovered most people don't do well. For 10 hours studying, writing, etc. And most people, if they're studying for 3 hours, will spend 2 of it talking to other people, wandering around, pretending to study, fiddling papers, with bits and pieces in the middle that are distracting.
Study after study has found that people usually turn out about 6 good hours of work a day. 6 hours of productivity is about the max that most people can turn out. And on a bad day, when I'm having to do things that I find tedious, I probably turn out less than that. But on a day when when I really get into a nice flow state, I can work 24 hours solid and barely take bathroom breaks. Like I lose track of time and suddenly become aware that my bladder is about to explode. So my wife hates it. She hates it so much because I don't hear anything. Like I just literally, like, the kids are screaming and the house is on fire and I'm just like still in whatever I'm doing. Drives her bananas, but it really is kind of like a superpower. And I get angry when that flow state gets broken because it's so hard. I'm so dependent on the muse, right? I kind of have to spiral into that. And I've kind of learned there's a little bit of a science to it. So your story is inspiring to, I think, a lot of people who don't meet other people's expectations, get misunderstood. That's what one of the things I really want to highlight here is, just the concept of sticking with it and overcoming, because I think you've really, really done that, and against great opposition, which is one of the things that turned me on, that I really need to take another look at the claims that so at first you denied being Satoshi Nakamoto. And then, like, I don't know.
Well, I didn't deny it. I just didn't answer.
Well, fair point.
So, I mean, I didn't actually say no. I just said I wouldn't answer the question.
Yeah. So it was probably, I don't know, it was a couple months. You were saying you were just like kind of dodging the question. But the article being out there probably turned your life into like a circus. What was that like? What was that like?
It was a complete circus for a while. I had people sort of trying to follow me, trying to do things like had to get film put on the windows of the house so that people couldn't take pictures in there. None of that I asked for. It just sort of happened. And I wasn't expecting it either. So I went from a very private sort of existence where no one knew who I was doing, what I was doing, or who I was, or anything like this, with a pile of staff in different areas, with companies in different areas, to suddenly everyone looking at everything I'm doing and investigating every time I sort of decide to have a coffee, or you name it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really, like, I know from one of my past struggles involved my kids, where I was involved in court proceedings to try to keep them safe for years. The court stayed involved in our life for years. And everything we did was under scrutiny. Every decision could be taken out of context and made to seem nefarious. And it was, it's hell. It's hell to live under that kind of scrutiny. And you've been doing it now basically ever since.
Yeah. I get recognized quite a bit now. I went to upstate New York just over last week, and someone recognized me in a place I was staying, Finger Lakes, middle of fairly much rural backwater upstate New York, and someone recognized me. I was sitting in the lobby of a restaurant and the lobby of a hotel and a restaurant there, and met someone and got a pitch when I was in Toronto just a few days before that. So went from being completely unknown to occasionally walking down the street in London and having people ask for a selfie.
Yeah, I would have been one of those people if I'd have seen you on the streets when I was around. I've been in London a few times here and there. If I'd have seen you, I'd have been like, "Oh, Dr. Wright, I really got to have a selfie, please." Be very annoying. And I hate that. I really hate when I see people do that to like celebrities and stuff, because mostly I think celebrities and the concept of celebrity is just dumb. And most celebrities are dumb and they don't matter, and who cares? And so when people like just won't let them alone and won't let them eat dinner, it like drives me crazy. But then I'm like, there are certain people that I would probably be like that with. But they're really smart people. They're people who are like done things that actually matter. And, I think you're one of those people. Because I'm just jealous.
So not
no, I didn't even know what a Kardashian was for the longest time. Cause I really don't care about, listen, I murder at Trivial Pursuit. I kill everyone at Trivial Pursuit until it comes to the pop questions, the pop culture questions, which I miss almost every one because I just don't.
I fail on the sport ones.
I just don't care.
I know some things. I know a little bit about boxing.
But
when it comes
athletics,
to cricket or baseball or something, no.
I'm the same.
Babe Ruth. I know who that is.
I do follow athletics more than anything else, and but I don't view people's athletic prowess as, when it's gifts they were born with. I don't value that as much as people who do things the smart way. Like people who are innovative in combat sports, I like. Even people who I would personally dislike, like take somebody like Conor McGregor, who's very brash and really in your face and has said some things that are offensive. And I probably wouldn't like him very much if I knew him. But he was very innovative in striking in mixed martial arts. And that I admire. I admire a lot. The way he approaches the game mentally, the way he creates the illusion. He creates the illusion of distance and range to draw out behaviors that he wants to counter. And Israel Adesanya now has taken a lot of those innovations and taken them even further. And his matrix style, where he's got such a long reach, he can just kind of lean back and let you swing at him, and you can't hit him, but he can hit you. And that so the mental game, combat sports, but the mental game, not like just the physical attributes, is like, I follow that a lot. Because it's really intelligence that makes me admire people. It's intelligence and wisdom, and it takes both. I feel like it really took both to write the Bitcoin white paper. Although
the wisdom bit I'm still learning, that a lot of the time comes from experience, and there are things I could have done better. Even with the corporation and chain, one of the things when we started it, I told Stefan when we moved from Australia over to London that what I wanted to do was step back and just research and just create things. And that sounds great for me, but the problem I had even then was without giving, if I've got a vision, then I have to actually deploy that. If I don't lead and I don't focus people on what my vision is, then they're going to go off and bring in their own, and they're not going to have focus. And I've discovered that the hard way. We had that 2011 on. I basically told Gavin, don't change the protocol, just fix the broken bits. And of course, everyone goes out there and starts mucking around and wanting to change everything.
And in ways that seem like, to this uneducated observer, that seem to be designed to erode its capability to be disruptive.
Well, unfortunately, going right back to 2012, and then in particular after Silk Road, there were a lot of people who came in the 2011 period following the collapse of eGold and then subsequently the collapse of Liberty Reserve. And as they started figuring out that blockchain is traceable, they saw that as a problem. So the key aspect of Bitcoin that differentiates it from a cryptocurrency is that it is completely open, auditable, and traceable. And that traceability is what differentiates it from something like eCash or DigiCash products that ended up basically collapsing because they couldn't be traced. They couldn't have direct interaction from law enforcement. So the concept of Bitcoin is to remove the overall sort of NSA, GCHQ level monitoring of everything, and going back to a more human intelligence approach where you interview someone, find out where they got something, go to the next person. That way you have to target where you're going to focus. You focus on the biggest offenders, and you try and take down groups, not just the population.
Yeah, so this is an argument I had with people for a long time, where people were saying that anonymous internet money, where that's what they thought Bitcoin was, and I was like, no, it's not anonymous, it's private.
No,
it's private. You can figure out anything, but you have to decide to put resources into it. You can trace it, but it's not easy. It's not necessarily, going to be, it's not necessarily going to be worth it, like to monitor everything. You just don't have the kind of compute power. So you have to figure out who is, so now you have to focus on the bad actors. And this is the way the system is designed to work. And
exactly, which is the opposite of the NSA's model right at the moment, which is capture every bit of traffic and then hope
you're kind of targeting everyone, thinking everyone is a bad actor or could be a bad actor.
So instead of targeting the big guys, you target all the little guys. And that's
I agree 100%. It's an approach that makes us serfs on the state plantation. We exist at their sufferance, and that's the wrong model. The right model is one where it's the consent of the governed. I don't need the consent of the government. The government needs my consent. That's the fundamental model difference that I think we've kind of forgotten. I think a lot of people have become conditioned to want the government involved in everything, to make things fair, as if that were possible. And I think you're just not going to get fair because, as Milton Friedman said, the benevolent intentions of people who accumulate power does not render that power harmless. And I think that's one of the most important, that's another one of the most important insights of the modern world, which a lot of people who want to be powerful have kind of forgotten, because I feel like once you've got more money than you can ever spend, then what do you want next? Well, how about we just like run the world? How about we just accumulate power? And I've known a couple billionaires. You're very atypical for a billionaire, in my opinion. Because you don't seem to have that kind of divine right of kings kind of mentality where you think.
Well, I have a different thing. What I've learned is with more money, I can get more education, more books, more other things like this. So I've signed up for a lot more university courses. I do a lot more study because I can afford it now. I mean, I went from spending as much as I could in the past to spending as much as I can now, which is more time as my limit. And I think I spent about 1.5 million last year on education with different university courses, different programs, etc. And that's how I now spend my money. I spend it getting.
That is the dream. Like to be able to to be secure enough to do what you want to do, not what you have to do. I mean, like the concept of retirement is rubbish to me. Like, why would I want to sit down and drink Mai Tais on the beach for the rest of my life? Like that doesn't seem very appealing. It seems super boring.
It's horrible.
I
could do it for 4 or 5
exactly
days.
Right. And then I need something to do. And it just so happens.
Even then I wouldn't do the whole beach Mai Tai bit. I'm actually taking my 4 days little break where I'm still doing a few calls in the middle because that's me. But that's in a few weeks, and we're going over to northern Spain and Catalonia.
Oh, beautiful region.
And I'm going, but rather than Mai Tais, what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm going to a restaurant out there, and getting trained in the cooking sort of style, in Catalonian cooking style.
Nice.
So there's some Michelin-starred chefs that are in the region, and I've done this with some of Gordon Ramsay's restaurants and things like that in the past, and being able to afford to do this is another thing. Not just sitting in the restaurant, actually going behind and working. I mean, it sounds a bit weird to some people, but I mean, I actually pay for the privilege of going into a top restaurant and making.
Well, my wife and I went to the Savoy. That was our big splurge. We went on a driving tour of Scotland, and our first stop was in London. And I had it was a kind of I combined a business trip with a anniversary, one of our milestone anniversaries. We went to the Savoy while we were in London, and I wanted the tour. I wanted to go back in the kitchen, and I wanted to see. I wanted to like scout it. So I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. And the food in Catalonia really is remarkably good. So, you know, another thing we might talk about if we get through some of the personal stuff is the Catalonian secession movement, which is another fascinating thing that I think you probably have some thoughts on, as do I. But so why did you decide to own? It seems like, a couple months went by, you realized you weren't getting away from this, and then you decided to just take the bull by the horns and own this thing. What was that process like?
I tried not to at first. I tried to basically say, yes, it's me, now go away. And that didn't work, strangely enough. The whole, I don't want to do any more interviews, go away, that only made the media worse. Ironically, you try and tell media, I don't want to talk to you, and the first thing the media do is they hound you. Why don't you want to talk to us? Everyone wants to talk to us. No, I don't. But you must. We're media. So you go from one extreme to the other. You sit there going, look, just leave me alone, and they do the opposite. Then, unfortunately, I started trying to change the silly narrative that was starting in the BTC land, which was segregated witness, taproot, changing all the algorithms, building Lightning, which isn't at all about scaling. It's about removing the logging function,
which still failed because you still leave enough breadcrumbs to get caught, as we've seen recently. Yes, they're still failing at it.
But that's why they're going to try and add taproot, snore, and ... until they make it something. But unfortunately, they're not going to succeed. The whole innovation of why Bitcoin works, why blockchain works, is that it's a public auditable system.
I wish I could explain this to people, that it's having an immutable, transparent data layer. Like,
it's also creating cash.
Well, that's the incentive. But to me, the way I've always viewed it, and you can correct me, you can fix this view of mine if it's wrong. Like the coin part is just the incentive structure that supports the bit part. That's kind of the way I think about it.
It's integrated. It's all integrated. So it is the incentive structure. It's monetary units, etc. You can build other things on top of it, like central bank digital currencies, etc., and they can be efficient. But to be truly efficient, you need to just stay in the basic unit of Satoshis. Because every time you add layers, you make less efficiency, you add cost. So by going directly in Bitcoin, you can go into sort of micropayments in thousandth of a cent units, and with payment channels even cheaper. I mean, the promise is now being able to pay someone 100th of a cent for 4 billion communication packets.
Yeah, 100% true. That's exactly my view. It's like the really interesting possibilities get opened up by the shared data layer and micropayments. Like, that's what opens up things that you can't do any other way. And the ability to make $1 a day is like doubling some people's income. It's life-changing to some people.
I mean, right now you can't actually have people work on a lot of systems like Amazon Turk. In the West, we say, oh, terrible, exploitative, etc. These people only earn $70 a day. But if you're capable of earning $10 a day and you're on $1 a day, but you need a bank account, then the problem is, how do I get that bank account? And it's a catch-22 for a lot of the world. If you can now find a way of even getting a temporary loan, a micro loan, to get you connected to the internet, to do some tasks, to learn how to do things, to earn the money and pay for things as you're going, suddenly it opens up opportunities. And we can say, oh, it's terrible, these people are being exploited. But it's like the Nike factories in China. Before a lot of the protests closed them, there were people applying to get jobs in Nike and waiting 18 to 24 months, just waiting to hope that they could be exploited by Nike. Because the level of exploitation in the West and what we consider exploitation is very different to somewhere like China or in African nations, where if you're being paid 3 or 4 times the average wage in your area, you don't consider yourself exploited.
You consider yourself lucky to have the opportunity. And this opportunity can get opened up for a lot of people as the internet proliferates. Less and less people are illiterate. Less and less people don't have the internet. Less and less people, like, you go to Pakistan and underneath the burqas, you see the light of cell phones. Like, this development is continuing to put, if you have a cell phone, you could make $1 a day in Bitcoin. And you could do that right now, really.
Yeah, you could probably make more than that. I mean, doing small tasks for people.
I mean, you got. I mean, all of these micro pay. And so when I actually spoke at the CoinGeek conference I was part of a panel on NFTs in Miami, and this is how I opened up the talk. Was I said, right now there are trillions and trillions of dollars in value that are locked out of global markets because of the cost of doing business in the payment layer. And if you remove that.
And right now, the other problem is the world has gone towards silly financial products, and 52% of our GDP is finance. So we're taking people away from sort of the end goal and creating a whole lot of sort of money transfer schemes that don't really help build anything in society. They don't create more. I mean, you need some level of finance, but 52% of the economy isn't.
It was TARP in the United States that made me really realize what a serious problem we have, that the entire financial infrastructure, if you were going to design a financial infrastructure to transfer wealth from the poor to the rich, what we have is what you would design. So I'm not going to say I know what the intention was or that it's a vast conspiracy, but the incentives here and regulatory capture, and now too big to fail. Like, really, it's.
Well, my answer is very simple. You know what they say about the sort of path of good intentions.
100% true. 100% true. The Cobra effect is so real. You don't you think you're doing something good, and then it turns out you just had no idea what the incentives you're setting actually are. That's actually the secret sauce of my consulting career, was to go and point out the incentive structure the organization actually had versus the one they thought they had. Usually the problem is people prioritizing output over outcome. And as Drucker said, someone with a metric to meet will meet that metric even if they have to wreck the organization to do it. Because that's how they get paid, because that's what they get rewarded and punished based on. And you see this, the Cobra effect is everywhere. It's in basically every government program. And I mean, really, TARP is thieving from the poor to give it to bail out the rich who took too much risk because they felt insulated from that risk. And that's the problem. You can't insulate people from risk without massive unintended consequences. So that's a little bit of a diversion. So I think my original question I was going for before we went off on our very interesting tangent was why? Okay, so at first you tried to say, yes, it's me, but leave me alone. And then at some point you said, okay, you guys are not going to leave me alone. And you changed course dramatically and decided to come out and just be in charge of Bitcoin. What changed your mind on that?
Well, the first bit was in 2017. I talked to people before SegWit and all this other stuff was fully implemented, trying to convince people that it was not a good way to go. I talked to a whole lot of people who now don't like me, James Locke and a lot of the BTC developers, and I tried to, make the argument that changing the protocol wasn't a good thing. I didn't sit there going, hey, I'm Satoshi. I didn't answer yay or nay. I just said, look, that shouldn't matter. What I'm giving you is fact. This changes the protocol significantly, and you can't change the protocol. The reason for that, it's like a game of Monopoly. You can't suddenly halfway through the game change the rules. You can't say anyone with a token who's currently landed on this square gets an extra $2,000 just because they are. It doesn't make a fair game. So this is the distinction people don't get. You can't change the protocol in Bitcoin because it changes the power structures in Bitcoin. Anytime you change, you give some people a heads up. You give some people extra problems. Some things break. Some things need to be changed. So the protocol doesn't include some of the things like turning off any of the opcodes. I mean, they should have been turned back on, but they're not a protocol feature. That's part of a unilateral contract. You can't make people do it. Unfortunately, people didn't realize that and started arguing that it's part of the protocol. It's not. The protocol is things like changing and adding OpsLTV, OpsCSV, adding differences that drastically change how unlock time and sequencing work. All of those create a different system, and to pass it off and call it Bitcoin is just wrong. So I had no problem with them creating a new system and doing that as an experiment, making another version of Litecoin, but you don't do it to Bitcoin. So unfortunately, I had to fight to keep the Bitcoin blockchain going without it being hijacked and bastardized completely. But then others, including our friends at Bitmain and Roger Ver, had different ideas again. And even after all of this, the first thing they want to do is change the protocol and alter the system again. And the thing is, nothing they wanted to do couldn't be done apart from removing logging. The only aspect of Bitcoin that nobody can get rid of and still have it as Bitcoin is the logging and traceability. Now, you can sit there going, oh, but the government can do X, Y, Z against me. Well, if you're not on Silk Road and you're not doing significant levels of crime, then no, they won't. But equally, if you're buying a $20 baggie, nobody's going to care, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct, because you only have, look, the intelligence community only has so many resources to spend. And they're not going to focus on you, if you're doing normal levels of like resistance type stuff. Like, I just don't, like, say I don't agree with the FDA. I want to use something they don't want me to have, so I'm going to buy it on a gray market or whatever. Then nobody cares that much about that. There's ways to get caught doing that kind of stuff. I mean, look, so many people use steroids. They're prolific in the athletic community. No, when's the last time you saw somebody get arrested for that? Like, yeah, if you're, and the privacy aspect, the amount of compute power it takes to figure out, they're not going to go find everybody who spent, $80 on a vial of testosterone or, whatever. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's like, a lot of these arguments are so theoretical and they don't make sense. Like, I'll say I'm borderline. So my own ideological journey took me kind of like to the border of something like voluntarism or agorism. And then I kind of came back because there's a few questions I just couldn't figure out how you answer if there's absolutely no state, if there's absolutely no power.
Well, it needs to be a balance. So, I mean, this is the point I keep making. Federalist number 10, Madison. Pure democracy always ends up collapsing. So the reason that America is a republic and not a democracy, although that's been eroded, is to balance the different aspects of power, not to have a all-powerful democracy, because then the mass, the mob, can do anything they want, including taking property away from others, including interning people, etc. So you want to remove the power from both the mob and the individuals and take power and balance it between everyone so that nobody can exert it.
Exactly right. And this is the key point people miss because they don't think deeply about incentive structures. To me, a very easy way to demonstrate this is just to ask someone, okay, let's say you live on a cul-de-sac, you have 4 neighbors. If your 4 neighbors get together and vote to take your stuff, does that make it okay? No. Okay, so then at what point of scale does it become okay? Like there's no, the scale doesn't change it, right? So, so the tyranny of the majority is no different than the tyranny of a minority. So if
I mean, 51% doesn't make it right for the 49%.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And people just don't. That's another thing that's horribly misunderstood, and why we've got to get back to teaching kids about Hobbes and Locke, and the fact that Hobbes lost this argument and Locke won, and it's been proven. And the more we try to improve it, the worse we're making it. Well,
I mean, if we look at something like Rwanda back in the 1990s, people don't seem to understand that it was the majority government that oppressed the minority and committed genocide.
Well, everything that happened in Germany was legal. Is the primary argument for that?
Exactly.
They made it legal by a elected representative body, and then they did. Does that make it right? No, obviously not. Exactly. We still held them accountable. And we had to. A lot of people had to sacrifice to hold them accountable and prevent it. And that I feel like the modern world, and this is where my sociological theory about things can only get so good before a society will self-destruct, is because your expectations are so out of whack from what you're actually going to experience, and you just start thinking everything is owed to you, and that all comes at somebody else's expense.
I would argue that. I'd argue that comes down to education, and over time we always move away from education. I mean, and education gets lost. If you're looking at the Roman Empire around the 4th century, or you're looking at today, then the changes in education and the culturalization mean that we move away from what worked in the past into trying things for the sake of trying them, or as we do now, confusing vocational training and getting something for a job with education. Education is about the creation of wisdom, citizenship, and knowledge about us as people. It's focused heavily on the humanities. So I do a lot of study in the areas of mathematics and physics, but I balance them with studies in history and politics.
I think that's so important to be well-rounded, but the problem is the well-roundedness that people are getting is not actually well-rounded.
Well, not anymore. We're not caring about educating people. We're caring about getting grades for jobs.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're very different concepts. Learning how to think, how to read, how to basically understand the wisdom of the past. And that's a critical part of what is really education.
Well, The Last Jedi taught us that even the Force wants to destroy the Jedi Order and destroy all of their historic works. That's our modern conception. We throw out all the wisdom of the past. They got nothing to teach us. I feel like this is the biggest problem, right? And I feel like there's been a systematic destruction of our appreciation for how we got here by calling it colonialist and patriarchal, and all of this kind of stuff.
I completely agree. And we forget that it's the British and French who sort of fought to get rid of slavery. I mean, made it illegal. Every culture through history had slaves, but then someone starts changing in an Enlightenment idea, saying this is wrong, and we forget that is the key difference here. The Romans had slaves, the Greeks had slaves, the Babylonians had slaves, the Egyptians had slaves. Everyone through history,
and a lot of places in the world still do. I mean, there's like something like 27 million Africans in slavery in the Middle East right now. Like slavery still exists. Human trafficking still exists. Like we ain't done yet. We ain't gonna get there by calling the good stuff that we're doing colonialist and patriarchal. We're not gonna by trying to say mathematics is racist and science is colonial patriarchy. That's not gonna get us anywhere. But everybody wants a cause.
I agree.
And again, it goes back. Everybody needs something to fight for. Everybody needs a cause. And they look around and they don't see real problems, so they invent fake problems so they can fight them. But the problem is these are not problems that can be solved.
We got real problems.
Yeah, we really do.
Real problems. People sit there going, I can't fix that one. Well, the problem is you can, but they're small and incremental. And small incremental things don't sound like, well, I can just go out there and click like 100 times and do a sit-in on the street and everything will be fixed. Rather, I have to work hard for 20, 30 years.
And you put yourself on the line the way Martin Luther King Jr. did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he put himself on the line. Like, they would have tests where if he wouldn't let you protest with him, they would make you line up and insult you and say horrible stuff to you and slap you in the face. And if you reacted, then you were out. You couldn't protest with him because that's effective over time. Now, I will say, maybe it's a defect in my character that actually Malcolm X's rhetoric resonates with me more than Martin Luther King Jr.'s would have at the time. Because, like, somebody puts a boot on your neck, my response is fight. And his response was put it in the news, let people see it, generate empathy and sympathy. And that works way better in the long term. But you got to be willing to put yourself on the line for it. And
the bit that most people don't seem to want to understand, however, is that all of this is slow, incremental, and everything that we're doing needs to be built over time. So it is not about going out there and going, we need to change the world. I mean, for instance, if we look at mental health problems, that's a growing problem at the moment because we deinstitutionalized a lot of issues. And by doing that, we have a lot of people on the street who don't get treatment anymore, have problems, and we say, oh, but we fix them. But you don't. Now, it's not going to go away. There's no cure for things like schizophrenia. So you either manage it over someone's life, or and you remember that 20 years from now, you're going to be managing people over their lives. It's not, we're just going to fix this and go away. You don't. You fix it, and you fix it, and you fix it, and it requires constant effort and work. And they're the sort of things that we've taught people that they shouldn't have to do anymore. I mean, we've educated people to think they can click their fingers, and just by doing something simple, that everything's fixed. That, on a completely different flip side to this, you take the Californian wildfires. I mean, the reality here is forest.
Exactly right.
It's not about all the temperature changes or anything like this. It is pure and simple.
Because the environmentalists wouldn't let them do control burns.
Exactly. Which happens to be what the indigenous people in the region used to do anyway. In Australia, the indigenous people always used to do controlled burns, and we stopped it saying that they were wrong, and then we get lots of fires. And then we go, oh, we need to learn from indigenous wisdom. Well, I mean, if we'd been doing what we were doing, then we would have found that we didn't have all the fires because the underbrush wouldn't have built up for 10 years, and then the conflagration that ensued wouldn't be so huge.
That's 100% true. And something that's another infuriating thing is seeing people argue against themselves on behalf of the environment. So I don't call myself an environmentalist because of their stigma, but I'm a conservationist. My dad was a superintendent of state parks in the state of Alabama. And I grew up in a very conservationist, forest management culture. And so I kind of know what you have to do to keep these ecosystems healthy. And if you want to say, well, they were healthy before humans, it's like, okay, but we've been here long enough. If you want to do it without humans, you got to go back in time 5,000 years before we made all the changes we made, before we removed all the predators. Now we have to step in and play the role of those predators. Now we have to step in and, unless you want wolves coming up in your yard, then you're going to have to, step in and play the role the wolves used to play. It's just maddening to me to say, like, California and the drought situation. They know they're going to have a drought every 4 years or so. The population has increased like tenfold since 1956, but there has not been a significant water project in that time. They haven't built any reservoirs. They haven't done anything to collect water. Like the irrigation systems are all dependent on they don't work in drought, but they could work in drought. But the environmentalist lobby stops anything.
Well, this is really the centralization versus decentralization or localization, as I prefer to call it, problem. Rather than saying centralization, I prefer to call it localization. Now, in localizing, like Elinor Ostrom demonstrated that if we have a need to have a common pool of resources, we can get rid of the tragedy of the commons by giving stewardship and ownership and community for that. So we can have people own a park, and people in a community can run that themselves. They can own a forest. They can live there and have responsibility. And we can push things out to the edges. And that can be monitored, and we can make sure that it's done right. And we can train people, we can educate people, we can give them all the help that they need, but allow them to do what needs to be done. Allow them to know that it's their house that they're protecting, that they in their community are making something that is a difference for their own children.
Defenestration is a term that describes this process of pushing decision-making away from the center, because the center is actually the worst place to make most decisions. And this is true. This concept is true in organizations, corporations. It's true in government. It's true in it holds true. The people in the center. You can think of any organization or any collective entity like a donut, where you have outside that is in contact with reality and an inside that is insulated from the reality of the market and the economy. And we because we have this aristocratic mindset that there are certain people who are just better able to make decisions for everybody. We want to make all the decisions in the center, but information only gets there through a game of whisper, where the information is distorted as it approaches.
The way that I would say it as a balance is that the best thing to do is to have the center set a vision, a leadership policy, and a strategy. And then that is pushed out to the edges. So if you have everyone on the edge having their own strategy, nothing gets done.
Exactly.
I mean, if you look at the sit-ins in 2008, like everyone going, we're going to find a strategy and complain about the government and all the stuff in the financial collapse back then. Nothing happened. Nothing got voted on. The committee never created something. You need leadership. So leadership, though, should set this is what we're doing, and then allow people to go out there with that fixed idea, that fixed vision, and build it themselves. And then lots of experiments on the same vision.
Yes, 100%. And this is like, you've basically just hit on my organizational theory. I wish I could, maybe I'll show you my roadmap document I created recently that basically is basically this, basically elucidate. It takes that, like my particular organizational philosophy, which is basically exactly what you just described, and has strategy coming from leadership, but tactics are being implemented by the people doing the work.
Well, this was actually my biggest failure with Bitcoin. I said, this is my vision. And then I said, basically left Gavin and others, and I said, just follow it. But I wasn't there to make sure that it was followed. I mean, I didn't need to micromanage. I didn't need to sit there and say yes, no to everything. Rather, what I needed to do was stay there going, this is the vision. Yes, Bitcoin can scale. Stop fearing. Yes, Bitcoin will grow. Yes, the block size doesn't matter. And I needed to have those arguments and say, look, like I did in 2008 with James Donald, Bitcoin will end up consolidating into a few large data center nodes. So what? They're competitive. Anyone can compete. Someone from China can compete with someone from the US, can compete with someone from Uzbekistan, can compete with someone from Congo, with London, ... It doesn't matter. And as those players come and go, the competitive edge will find the best. And that's, I mean, I needed to keep pushing that point. I needed to keep focusing on the vision, which is what I'm trying to do now. we need to scale, not just slightly. I mean, talking about 1 million transactions a second by the end of the year, but by the end of the decade, I want to get in the order of a billion to 10 billion transactions a second and just keep scaling from there. And people say, why do we need this? Well, it's very simple. I mean, it's a Kevin Costner moment. If you build it, they will come. If it's cheaper, faster, more reliable,
yes,
people are just going to start using it. Why? Because it's cheaper, faster.
It's economically inevitable.
And this is the difference with, I'm setting a central vision. I'm going to build this. And people go, but what are people going to do? And my answer is, I don't care. I'm building the plumbing. I'm building the platform. This is the decentralized bit, the localized bit, anything you want. If you can build something and make money and it's legal, go for it.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm saying if it's legal because there's an audit trail that you can't get rid of. So if you're doing illegal stuff, you end up like the Silk Road guys.
Yes. And so to me, the fact that you included Bitcoin script is evidence of your knowledge, of your lack of knowledge of how the ultimate innovation would get used. Like, I don't know what you're going to do here to have this and do whatever you want with it. And so, of course, what's one of the first things that Blockstream gets involved and takes out is Bitcoin script. Yeah,
you have to use it our way. I mean, this is the irony. They talk about centralization. That is centralization. They're sitting there as the Politburo of the Soviet of BTC, telling everyone that this is a democracy. You can vote any way you like, as long as it's ours. Like Stalin, we're a democracy. Everyone wants to vote.
It doesn't matter who votes. It only matters who counts the votes.
Exactly. Well, I mean, everyone actually did. Everyone who voted for Stalin. They just, if you voted against them, they tracked you down and sent you to a gulag. So, I mean, let's see. I can go to a gulag, or I can vote for Stalin. Gulag, Stalin. And this is BTC. If you do something we don't like, and you've got a product you're building, we might just change the protocol a little bit, and suddenly your product doesn't work anymore. We might turn that feature that you need off. We might tweak it and give someone else an advance warning.
Yeah.
But if you have a fixed protocol, you can't do that. I can't go up to someone and go, I don't like your business model. I'm going to change this aspect of the protocol and break it. I mean, sitting there and going, I'm going to make Bitcoin scale more and have more transactions is completely different. You don't even need to keep everything. SPV means I need the hash header, not the whole block. And the irony people don't seem to get is the hash header for each block is just as secure as the whole block. And people go, oh, but what if I don't? What if it doesn't validate? And what if? Well, here's the answer for you. If the hashes in the binary tree, the Merkle tree, don't work, then the hash header doesn't work. So either the hash is invalid all through, or the hash is valid all through. There's no partial answer here. Either the whole lot is secure or nothing is. It's very much a predicate, binary structure.
Yeah, 100%. You can't have, and it validates everything below it. Every new thing validates everything below it. And I like, people don't, I wish I could find a better way to explain that to people, because it's one of the things I find the hardest to explain, that people just, like, it takes a while for people to get their head wrapped around that. Okay, so I don't think we ever got to the question that I was trying to draw out, which is, like, why did you change your mind? And I think if I was going to summarize the answer, it's because people kept mucking everything up.
So in 2017, yes, I went out with John Matonis in a conference, and I stood in front and talked to people saying, look, stop doing this whole silly we can't scale bit. Stop saying that everyone needs to run Raspberry Pis. I mean, the reality is there are only 15 BTC nodes. There are only 3 of those controlling 51% of the network. All of this lie about having 10,000 is just a pure lie. There's not 10,000 nodes. Nodes create blocks. The only consensus mechanism is to create a block and have it built 100 deep. So I know people want to say otherwise, and there's lots of nodes and I'm helping, sort of Ralph Wiggum-wise from The Simpsons, but you're not. Now, so I had to come out and stand in front of people to say, look, I'm not going to answer one way or the other at first. In 2017, I was not either confirming or denying. If you ask me if I'm Satoshi, I said I'm not answering that question. What I'm going to tell you is how Bitcoin should work. And I sat there and I tried to tell people, and I tried to stop SegWit going through. I said it's a stupid change. I said it doesn't lead to anything good. I said Bitcoin doesn't do that, and you can't change it, and it's not a community project for the protocol. You don't get that choice, and everyone did it anyway. So unfortunately, that's going to be a very big negative for a lot of people soon. But
yeah, that's the next thing I wanted to get to, is that how soon after you changed your mind about kind of, you're like, I feel like, just as an observer, I feel like the probable sequence of events here is you get doxxed, you try to like go back to living your life the way you were, realize you can't, then realize that this is actually a kind of a position of influence now, that if you own it, like people didn't want you to be, people kept trying to make you be Satoshi Nakamoto until you were, and then they told you to stop being Satoshi Nakamoto because they don't like what you're saying.
Well, they actually started calling me fake Toshi and calling me a fraud before I even said it. So part of why I said screw it, was I refused to say whether I was or wasn't. I refused to say no, I'm not, because I was. And then I got asked in court, and I said I didn't want to answer, and the judge basically slammed me, saying you have to. And I said, well, yes, I did. Yes, I am, because I was under oath. And then, of course, I got slammed by everyone, lying and all the rest. Well, I'm sorry, but if I'm getting put under oath, it's very simple. I'm not lying. I put my hand on the Bible and I had to answer. So wasn't my choice. I was forced into that position, and I wasn't going to lie under oath.
So then the question had to be answered, and then you, like, at some point you decided to use this now to kind of take the narrative back, take the bull by the horns, and it appears to me that you have a fairly deep strategy here to right the ship, to help burn out the Cruft, which partially will happen just from the pure economics of the fact that they don't work and have no value. They'll burn themselves out. But and then partially there's a legal strategy here to exert legal ownership that will, I think, be having repercussions for a long time to come. So how long did it take you to sort of develop the strategy that you were going to implement to sort of take it all back from the people who were mucking about with it?
That really started happening after the implementation of SegWit. I did my best to try and talk to people in the background and try and convince them that it was silly. And some people were convinced for a little bit and then decided that they could do whatever with Bitcoin anyway, and formed their own sort of break again. But I tried to work with people and tried to enable others into understanding Bitcoin, and that didn't work. So I decided that I need to come back and own this. My creation, I'm the cause of it. So it's no good sitting there expecting other people to fix it. If I want it fixed, then I need to sit there and say, look, this is what I designed. This is what this sentence means. This is what it is. The Bitcoin white paper says you can have an alert system. There's a reason for it. I built the alert system. There's a reason for it. Taking it out, well, I said, this is what happens. I explained in simple words. Bitcoin white paper a couple dozen times says the word ownership or owner. It doesn't say possession. It doesn't say possession is protected by notes. It says ownership. It says all of this is fee-based. It says it's structured. Now, that works incredibly well for small transactions. For large transactions, you still need middlemen because you have AML requirements, KYC requirements. You have all of this stuff anyway. And sitting there going, we have the ability to send $1 million around the world. So what? So do I. I'm banking with Cause, which in London is like the Queen's Bank, because I'm wealthy enough, and I have the ability to send large amounts of money around as well. So what? Bitcoin doesn't save any of that, doesn't solve any of that. In fact, I have more protection and controls with private bankers than I ever will with sort of smart contracts, as people put them, which is really just EDI. Now, on the other hand, what I can't do, I can't send money around the world instantly at a fraction of a cent. If I want to send $1 million, I can do that cheaper than I can send 15 cents. I mean, that is the utter irony of all this right now. I can send £1 million to someone in the other side of the world, say someone over there in Chicago, and it will get to them very quickly. They'll see it in their account. They'll start getting interest, and it will cost me practically nothing. Yet, if I want to send 15 cents, it'll probably cost me £5.
Exactly. It's absurd. There's some of this. There's some absurdities built in here, which Bitcoin corrects. You know, it boggles my mind. Some people wouldn't be in favor of that.
And it's not removing banking. Bitcoin doesn't bank the unbanked. It doesn't give them a home loan, a car loan. It doesn't give them a business loan. It doesn't give them a lease. What it does is it gives them inclusion in cash, digital cash. For people who have never been online, never been able to send money around the world, don't have PayPal, who don't have MasterCards, now suddenly they can get online and buy and sell and be part of the digital economy.
And that exactly is the vision that drew me to it to start with. Not the so I'll admit that the kind of anarcho-capitalist idea of stateless money is attractive too.
That's also called communism.
So that's one of the things we could debate. But
I've read Marx and I can quote a lot of them. The problem with the anarcho-capitalist is they're taking right out of the Marxist definition of capitalism and the handbook.
Oh, 100% true.
Marxist concept. I mean, they don't even realize they're actually right into a deep Marxist philosophy of what capitalism is and why it's failing and all the rest, not understanding that capitalism isn't the problem. It is the constant push towards mercantilism.
So, capitalism is actually not even really a thing. I mean, Marx coined the term, but both what we think of as Adam Smith's free market insights and Marx's predictions that have proven to be completely false were both really attempts to describe how economics works in the absence of controls. How if you just let people do what they want to do, what's going to happen? I mean,
only to a point. I mean, Adam Smith wasn't libertarian in that way. He was. He had the argument like Hayek that markets need controls. Mises also said this. You need a small controlled government. You need someone who sets the rules. You need someone who's
100%,
but doesn't interfere.
And that's exactly where I fall. Government should be as small as possible, but no smaller. It should be the least amount of intrusive possible. It should be the least amount of coercive possible. But there is a level under which it is not really possible to go without some bad effects. Like, what's your legal structure to protect people's rights from each other? Right? You can't leave that to me to do.
This is this is the other aspect that we're taking away in developing more central strategies and more statute, where taking away the right for people to object through the judicial process. When a jury knows that someone technically is guilty but votes them not guilty anyway, because they think in this case they should be allowed to get that, just don't like that law, we're going to overturn it. That's a part of the democratic Western system, and we're eroding that. On top of that, the common law, we're eroding tort. Now, tort is a very powerful aspect of how common law systems work. And instead, we're putting in all these statutes that make complexity. They're great for lawyers, but that's it. Now, if we think about it for a moment, I would personally get rid of all of the drug laws. I mean, don't criminalize it, but enable tort, enable negligence, enable product warnings, enable all the rest. Now, imagine that any drug dealer could be sued. They can be sued for their product. I've become addicted, so I'm going to sue you, Mr. Drug Dealer, because you didn't tell me about how bad this was. My teeth fell out because I'm on ice. I want a new set of dentures. Suddenly, people are going to have a different product.
This is like the...
I mean, if I'm addicted...
100%. This is the return to juris naturalis, and giving people recourse, even against the government. A very, very, very critical Western innovation. And the more you take that away from individuals and the tort process, the more you centralize it and say, okay, we'll make everything fair. The game inevitably gets skewed towards the people who have the power to make everything fair and their buddies. And it's...
So at the end of the day, a lot of the reason that America ended up the way that it was as a republic was the whole, sorry, we don't want to have a central government overseas not representing us. We want to be able to locally represent ourselves and make
federalism.
And ironically, the way that the argument went at the time was, yes, we don't want stamp duty, we don't want this other stuff, but if you tell us how much tax you want to raise, we will do it ourselves. And the government said, no, we have to do it so we can control it. But it wasn't, if the idea is we just want to, I mean, you just need tax, we'll pay you that, how much? And we will raise it in the best way that suits our community. The end goal is still satisfied. This is the difference in what I'm saying with vision versus micromanagement. If you go up and say, look, you want to raise this much money through stamp duty, how about instead we put in some other tax that we accept, then you should be going, great, I'm still getting my money. The end goal is achieved. And the irony is the stamp duty sort of war before they separated ended up causing something like 25% unemployment in Britain at the time, in the before the Revolutionary War. There were a lot of debts that no one thought would be paid because the trade stopped. So all these manufacturers in England stopped producing. And for a very small amount of money, which was something like £60,000 that they would have collected, the government ended up losing millions of pounds back then, when millions of pounds was worth something. And that's the ultimate irony here. They damaged their own economy in England far more than they would have ever created.
Yeah, this is why I'm a free trader. I mean, you're not the only person you're hurting with kind of punitive trade stuff is yourself. By your preventing, you're actually creating incentive to go somewhere else. When you think you're creating incentive to do one thing and you're actually the Cobra effect, man, it just gets us. It just gets us all the time.
Well, it also goes back to like differential and incremental sort of taxation. I mean, at one stage in America's history, there was a 99 point something percent tax on every dollar you earn.
Well, now, only at the very top. Only at the very top. That was a.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if you're at that top and you're earning more, why do you want to earn more?
That's exactly right.
So instead of paying yourself an income now, all you do is you reinvest it and you earn money anyway. So the irony in all this is that if they said even like 40% tax rate, then you still go, look, I'm getting 60 cents in the dollar, I'm going to keep working. Instead, you get to that rate and people go, I'm just not going to pay myself anymore.
Well, and this is where the idea of the Laffer curve comes from. that there's actually a maximum tax rate you're going to extract no matter what you set nominal rates to, and it's about 18% of GDP. That is the maximum you're going to extract, because the moment it goes above that, you have incentivized people to cheat, to bend the rules, to find ways around it, to go to other jurisdictions, because contrary to what people think, tax jurisdictions are competitive. And you want to take more, so they'll just take it somewhere else. And so you're actually hurting yourself by setting your tax rates higher. And like it's become very fashionable to attack trickle down economics. But the truth is that when you disincentivize the people who are paying everyone else, you're actually hurting everyone. And the proof of this is that every time in the United States history tax rates have been cut, Treasury revenues go up. And it's a little bit counterintuitive. Like most things that are that in reality, it's a little bit counterintuitive, and you have to think more than 0.1 second to like understand it.
Well, I mean, if you consider that companies like Google just keep money overseas, they do that because, well, if we bring it back into the country, then they pay tax. So they just leave it sitting over there. But if you decrease the amount of tax, then that money comes back in and gets invested into American infrastructure. And
exactly right.
Growth. So, I mean, that's the irony people don't get. So we sit going, well, we own this overseas capital asset, but we're not going to take any money out.
100%. So you've incentivized it just to sit there and not get reinvested. Yeah, the whole eat the rich philosophy is so wrongheaded. I mean, Margaret Thatcher had the best quote of all time on this when she was in part. Some MP challenged her and said, "The divide between the rich and the poor has gotten wider under your leadership." And she says, "You've just exposed yourself, because every single person is better off. Everyone's making more, but you'd rather the poor be more poor than the rich be more rich."
Well, see, this is the thing people don't get. If we take two individuals and we say Alice, who's earning $10 an hour, and now we have Bob, who gets $20 an hour, and society doubles. Initially, the differential between the two is $10 an hour. But because society's doubled, now Alice is getting $20, and she's better by $10, and she has more. But now Bob, he's doubled again, so he has $40 from his 20. So we can look at that and go, originally there was a $10 differential between them. Now, if we do that on a certain way of lying with statistics, we can say there's a $30 differential between them.
Exactly right.
From where
the numbers get bigger.
It's actually $20, but
if all the numbers go up, then all the numbers get bigger, including the differential. But it's the same as a percentage.
Then when it doubles again, I know, but then it doubles again. And now Alice is on 40 and Bob is on 80. And we can sit there going, there's a $40 differential. In the past, there was a $10 differential. So the difference is bigger again. And it's getting larger all the time. But the truth of the matter is, Alice has more after those two things than Bob originally had. Yes, Bob has more. But Alice still has more than she originally.
I mean, the best way I've ever found to explain this to people who have a hard time with it, whose fundamental sense of fairness starts to get triggered, is to say that a rising tide lifts all boats. You don't take pieces of the pie away from someone to give to somebody else. You make the pie bigger. And the only way you do that is to create wealth. If we really cared about the poor, we'd be obsessed with wealth creation. What creates wealth? Exactly. Because then that wealth it does trickle. It trickles. It creates incentives. Competition for labor. Competition is the key. Okay, so let me see. We've got about 30 minutes left, I think. So I did want to ask you a couple of more questions here. So here's one that I think might take a while to get into. So one of the questions that somebody wanted me to ask you about was to talk about your childhood a little bit and what it was like growing up in Australia. So and I don't love to ask those kind of questions that much, but I did think of a way to link that back to something that I do find really, really interesting. Not that your childhood's not interesting. I'm sure it's deeply interesting, but it's more interesting in terms of how it made you who you are. And so when I look at the white paper and I see how deeply thought out the incentive structures are in there, I wonder what it was in your background, specifically in your childhood and the ways that you grew up and what you observed that made you think in that way. So what do you think? Is there, like, I talk a lot about people who are successful from the South, about there's some unique things about being from the southeastern United States. People think of it as backwards and bumpkin and whatever. But there's some things that you absorb culturally that give you certain advantages. And I wonder if you have identified some of those things for yourself and how you grew up.
I grew up quite poor. I mean, at one stage we lived above a small shop, and I had way too many sisters, so I actually lived in what was a hallway from my bedroom at one stage, which everyone came through. But I watched my mother work many jobs. I did sort of saw how hard she was working, but I also saw other people who did quite well because of their positions. And what I learned was it's not about how hard you work, but sort of a combination of hard work and using your brain. You've got to innovate, you've got to find things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up, rural South, in the woods, basically, lower middle class, borderline poverty. The family actually did go bankrupt at one point, and I was sleeping on a couch for a while as a teenager. And I had to watch my parents pull it back together and figure out how to go forward and kind of, those are, and I've done very well in life. I've outcompeted most of the people who did better than me when I was younger, most of the people who had more than me. And I attribute that to the mindset you get struggling. That you, if you don't see what it's like to how hard it actually is, then you'd never have the expectation that you're going to have to do a lot of things you don't want to do. You're going to life's a grind. And if you can't embrace that grind and the parts that you don't like, and which is actually even harder for me because I have ADHD, doing the things that are not interesting to me is like trying to pull my own teeth out with a rusty pair of pliers. It's super, super hard. But you just have to figure it out. I never did figure that out till I was a grown man in my 20s. And it literally, it would bring me to tears to try to do some of those things that I don't like doing because they needed to be done. It would be so frustrating. But again, half of life is just showing up. Just keep showing up every day, show up, and good things will happen.
Yep. Well, not always, but you've got to accept that bad things happen as well. I mean, that's something people got to. Sometimes you've got to realize that no matter what you do, things don't go your way.
That my dad had a saying. So my parents had a lot of really good sayings, and my grandparents grew up during the Depression, and so my parents absorbed a lot of that Depression wisdom. And sort of like, so like one of my grandmother's favorite sayings is, you can put a cat in the oven, that don't make it a biscuit. Which is just wise. That's just as wise. You like, where but one of my dad's sayings was,
remind me if I get a cat.
Well, one of my dad's sayings was, shit happens, you deal with it, and life goes on. I must have heard him say that 100 times over the course of my life, but I really kind of deeply absorbed that into every life some rain must fall. And everybody's dealt a hand, and it doesn't really matter. Some people get a better one, some people get a worse one. You just got to play the one you're dealt as the best you can, make good decisions. And I sort of absorbed that and came to see life as kind of a probability tree, that there are certain branches that tend to lead towards good outcomes and certain branches that tend to lead towards bad outcomes. And your job as a human is to make the decisions that prune the bad probability trees that put you in, that continually move you into a position for more good things to happen than bad, and to just keep raising the bar. And it goes back to incrementalism and Kaizen. The concept of Kaizen is kind of deeply baked into the lean thinking and DevOps and kind of the incremental organizational improvement philosophies. And that's basically my whole life philosophy. And I feel like yours as well. It seems evident that you've embraced the idea of Kaizen, of continual good change.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So one more question. This is a question I know some people have for you. And obviously you can tell people to buzz off, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to do so. So, you've said a few times in various mediums that coins will move, meaning that at some point, BTC stuff will get shifted around, and possibly liquidated. That's how it's commonly interpreted. Whether that's exactly what you mean or not, I can't say. Maybe you can clarify that. But then recently, 200 so-called sleeping coins that I think were mined in 2011 or 2010.
They weren't mined, though. I mean, just because they don't, this is very good. Just because you see something doesn't mean it's anyone's.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Yeah, I mean,
stop looking at the blockchain and caring about someone else's.
I agree with you 100%. It's not a really interesting question to me, but I know that people wonder if that was you moving coins around. And you can
this is the whole point. Stop caring about other people's money.
And that is a sufficient answer. That is 100% a sufficient answer for me. I believe you will get pestered about this more, but I can.
When things happen from me, that's simple. And my answer is very simple. Nodes enforce ownership.
I accept that answer 100%. That is totally satisfactory to me. I guess we're at about an hour and 40 minutes. That's quite a bit of your time for this conversation. We probably don't have time to get into any of the areas where we disagree, but I hope you've enjoyed this conversation enough that you'll want to do it again.
No,
and we'll.
So where do you disagree?
Well, I think we touched on it a little bit. So you dislike agile methodology. And I made my career telling people why they dislike agile methodology because they were doing it wrong. Because it was misunderstood.
I've had lots of people who've been very good at agile, and the problem is, this is what I want built. That's what I get. And
so I would argue agile is really about risk management. Because
I would say it's risk mitigation. I mean,
think of it like let me just try to explain what I'm trying to say right there.
Well, no. What I'll say is it's like putting your eggs not in one basket.
I would disagree.
Now, if you don't know how to manage, I mean, I'm going to use 10 baskets and put my eggs all over the place because they'll be safer. My answer is no, they won't. If you put them all in one and you concentrate the hell out of keeping that basket safe, that's your best way.
Okay. So let me extend your analogy a little bit. And here's what I think the real point of agile is. Okay. So agile is you have 100 eggs that you're going to do something with. Okay. So you have an idea in your mind that if I take these 100 eggs and I use them like this, I will get 1,000 eggs back. And so you take your 100 eggs and you put them in a position where you're either right or you're wrong, where you get 1,000 eggs or maybe you get nothing. Okay. So what if there's a way to get to that ultimate vision where I'm only risking 10 eggs at a time or 1 egg, and I can test my hypothesis? Really, you can think of agile really as hypothesis-driven development, where I have a hypothesis of value, but I'm not sure until it goes into the market if that's right or wrong. So what I'm going to do is progressively test my hypothesis.
What you're saying is, I don't actually know. So that's great. You expend resources and you try something. You expend resources and you try something. It don't work that way. Like Bitcoin wouldn't have existed. I went through a design the thing and I tested it, and I drew it out, and it was horrible waterfall type thing with all the different things drawn out and structured. And the simple answer is because then I could see that it would work. So I could have tried something and it failed, and tried something and failed, and Bitcoin would never be there. It would never be a protocol.
What I would argue
Mm-hmm.
is that you actually created an MVP. What is the minimally viable way to test this? And you built that, and then continued to iterate on it. Once you had tested the hypothesis of value, you continued to iterate on it. And I would argue that is the Agile philosophy.
I would say differently. I would say what I did was I did the best product that I could do personally. And in Australia, in the Morgan, with what we were trying to build, apart from core, mucking around with everything on us all the time and making life difficult, was a system that would scale and provably scale, etc. Now, we put a lot of time and effort into that, and it was designed way in advance. And the problem was, if the protocol didn't change, it would have been simple. But the protocol ended up changing, which ruined all what I was trying to do. Now, we've gone back and Terra node's been built sort of by planning it all in the first place and knowing what we're going to do. But it's not a iterative method. It is, I mean, when you're talking about something and you don't know the outcome, fine. But this is something that can't change anything, can't alter anything, can't muck up anything. There's no iterative process.
So I agree with you.
It has to
when you're thinking about what is my minimally viable product, sometimes it has to be a completely baked vision before you can start. And Bitcoin is an example of this. You have to understand how all the pieces work together, but you still have to be open to the idea that you might be slightly off and need to make some adjustments. But you can't really worry about that up front because the whole system links together. It's an interlinked system where they all have to be, all the incentive structures have to be linked. They have to be together or this whole system doesn't work.
Well,
so you actually...
See, I would actually argue that the problem was I listened to people and I turned things off and allowed them to be turned off. I allowed, hell to convince me that block size could be a problem for DOS and things like this, and I allowed others to say that, look, there are vulnerabilities, we need to turn off all the opcodes and check them all. So what I should have said is, show me where the vulnerability is, and we'll fix it. Show me why this is DOS, and we'll fix it. Instead, at the time all these people told me how wonderful they were, and being an ASPI, I believed them. Eric Voorhees was basically living on a friend's couch at the time, which I had no idea about. What I found out later was he was unemployed, and no one would hire him for his coding. And I sat there listening to him tell me where the problems of Bitcoin were.
Yeah, I hear you. And and this is basically another one of those like secrets that I locked into early in my career and has really helped me, is learning that the real problems are never in the technical system. They're in the human system. And if you really think about it, there is no technical system, because if you take a computer out of a box and you put it on the desk, what does it do? It does nothing until a human tells it what to do. So it's really...
And some of the arguments people make about, the protocol could be more efficient, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? If you're talking 0.1% efficiency over the ability to scale to millions of transactions, whoop-de-doo-dah. You could have wasted lots of money doing something slightly different and getting no real gain.
100% true. There's a diminishing return on optimization. And this is why in development, there's the saying that premature optimization is the root of all evil. Make sure you have something that needs optimizing. Test it first. Make sure people care. If nobody cares, you don't need to optimize it. You only need to optimize it if people use it. So that's the first thing that you have to solve is, does anybody care about this? Put it in the market. That's why my philosophy is ship it. Put it in the market, because the only test that really matters is production, is put it in the market and see if anybody cares about it. and iteratively, and that's how I got to where I am in terms of the iterative testing of your hypothesis of value. You believe something is valuable, but nobody else may believe that. So the only way to know is you put it in the market and see if anybody cares. Put the minimum amount of resources you have to into it to get to that test. Now you can optimize it. Now care if it's a monolith or microservices. Now care if it's what is the fundamental architecture. Like caring about that stuff too early, you go bankrupt before you get to something that people want. Now, I think the stars aligned for Bitcoin so perfectly. Of the technological layers were ripe for this. The economic layers were ripe for this. Everything was just right. And it took a really concerted effort to prevent it from quickly becoming what it seems to now finally be starting to emerge as.
Well, I'd say it wasn't perfect. I mean, the reason I'd say that is at the same time it was released, there were a lot of other things happened that became a negative part of all of this. I mean, like I was saying, e-gold was taken down by the government, and they had all those people pile in. Then Liberty Reserve, then Silk Road. I mean, people equated Bitcoin to the global financial crisis erroneously. I mean, I've stated before that I started coding in a time before all of that had happened, and if I knew that the financial crisis was going to happen just after it, I would have been the guy in the Big Short.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite movies of all time, by the way, The Big Short. The recognition of bubbles is so important. It's why I'm not getting as crushed as a lot of people right now, because I knew we were in an everything bubble, and I've been waiting on it to crash for a few years. The problem is that the markets can stay irrational longer than I can stay solvent. I forget where that quote comes from, but it's one I think a lot of people in BSV community and ecosystem are feeling. Is that everybody's trying to build useful stuff and waiting on the cruft to get burned out, but they're running out of money in the process of trying to build stuff. And it's a problem. It's a problem. And the real trick is to be able to, before you can win, you have to not lose. So being able to not lose long enough, that's also kind of my jiu-jitsu philosophy of self-defense, is that the first thing is stay safe. And then the second thing is you win. But you can't win if you don't stay safe. And that's kind of where we're feeling that pain in the BSV ecosystem right now. Got any words of encouragement for us?
Build, don't speculate. I mean, at the end of the day, the key thing to do here is stop thinking about how much money you're going to make through other people's effort, and understand that it's about how much you do yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I think nobody, as far as I know, so one thing that Jackson Lasky said that I found to be profoundly true was that that getting into the BSV ecosystem is a filter. And you have to be able to see things a particular way to have arrived here. So you have a lot of people who are highly rational, who believe the fundamentals are going to win. They're kind of anti-speculation, and they're builders. They're builders who want to use it for what it's for. But at the same time, what we really need is the mass adoption to kick in. And I think we're really close. I think we're really close to mass adoption.
That'll start happening. I mean, it's like the internet. It goes exponential is sort of this funny thing that looks flat. Yeah. Looks flat. Looks flat. Where the hell did that happen?
Yeah, I'll tell you, in 2017, I started doing a series of talks on how we are exiting the U shape of the curve of exponential change. The innovation timeline used to be millennia, and then it was centuries, and then it was decades, and then it was years, and now it's months. And where it's going to continue accelerating. So now we have to predicate everything we do on that tomorrow is not going to look like today. And I think that's where we are right now with Bitcoin as well, which is going to be a huge factor in enabling people to make change even quicker, which every layer of innovation allows people to make change quicker. And Bitcoin is going to make that, it's going to lower the barrier to entry so low that many people are going to be able to escape wage slavery and build residual and passive income. It's going to be revolutionary.
Okay, so I know what you're saying, and some people will. My answer is very simple. We have time preference differences. And I've got long horizon time preferences. I'm lucky I can think about things and plan for 20 years. Most people plan 20 minutes. And the problem with that is what you're saying, there might be more money, but they'll go out there and rather than wait a week, they'll take a payday loan and they'll get further in debt. And that's not going to change just because we have more.
No, I agree.
We need to educate these people how to actually be plan their finances. So, unfortunately, even with more money, we're not going to solve that problem.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That there's multiple layers to this, and you can't create. And this is the whole argument that's going on in society right now: is what's the right goal to strive for? Is it equal outcomes or equal opportunity? Does everything have to appear perfectly equal on the surface for things to be equal under the surface? And the truth is, like, how can you get two people who grew up in different cultures to have the same outcome when different siblings who grew up in the same household can't equalize their outcomes? Yeah. Like, it's just absurd. It's an absurd, like, all you can do is give people the opportunities. And like, and this is my argument. So I volunteered in homeless efforts a lot. And the thing that I've really observed is that in the Western world, for the most part, and in the United States particularly, no one stays homeless for a long period of time except people who either have mental illness or choose to, because the opportunity is there. And we're going to expand that opportunity and make it even easier to avoid the discouragement that leads people to just drop out. Because that's what happens. Somebody just decides it's too much trouble, I'm just going to drop out of society. And because the playing field is tilted and it's too hard and this whole thing is unfair, and it's all true. So the more fair we can make it, the less tries we can make it take for people, the better the world is, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the problem is we'll always have someone sort of mucking up, but allowing them to try again, and that's why we have bankruptcy laws to get past all their losses.
100% true. I mean, it's really about, it's not the first try, it's the fifth try, it's the sixth try. You got to get to that. You got to get to that sixth try.
You learn by failing. I mean, if you look at Richard Branson, I mean, one of the things I don't like as much is in the past he used to embrace his failures, but now he likes to say how successful he always was. I think he was much better when he was sitting there going, I tried, I failed in this company. I tried, I failed in this company. I tried, I failed. And look, I succeeded.
That's it, exactly.
I mean, grit, resilience.
And we got to raise our kids to expect that it's not about how many times you get knocked down. It's about how many times you get up. You know, dust yourself off, try again. It's cliche because it's true. You know, these sayings survive because they're true. And this is why you don't discard the wisdom of the ages, because they already figured some stuff out. Like, kids don't realize their parents already been through this. We already figured some things out, and we learned it the hard way. And you don't have to, but certain people like me are very hard-headed and can seem to only learn the hard way. That was the way I have learned almost everything. So hopefully I've set my kids up to, like, use me as a cautionary tale, if nothing else, and not have to learn everything the hard way. So, and I honestly, I just want to take a second here. I mean, we're at the end of our time that we have allotted. I think we could go for hours and hours, but I don't think people, like, 4-hour podcasts are a thing, right? But most people don't have the time to sit and listen to it.
That's a bit long.
I do.
And I've got things to chase up as well. Anyway,
but I just want to thank you first of all, for taking the time to talk with me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that we have a lot more in the future. Because you're a very interesting person to talk to, and I feel like every time I talk to you, I'm gonna learn something, and But the second thing I really want to thank you for is for releasing the white paper and for kicking this whole thing off. I feel that we're on the verge of really making.
If I could get people to actually read it, I'd be really happy. I mean, not with preconceived ideas, but to actually take the words for their original meaning, not what people have changed them to be. Peer-to-peer, define it as in 2008. It doesn't matter what people say it means now. It matters what it meant when the paper was written. And when you look at this, understand that Alice and Bob, direct exchange, that doesn't mean you send to a node. And understand the word ownership doesn't mean possession. I mean, these are simple words. Grab a dictionary if you need to confirm what I'm saying.
I love it. I love it. You're an originalist, the Bitcoin originalist. Interpret it the way it was meant, not the way you think it should be.
Yeah, it's like the Constitution in the United States. Oh, I think what they really meant was when they were thinking about this, they were planning that in 250 years there'd be computer systems that interact.
No.
Okay? No. They didn't think that way. When they said privacy, they meant privacy. When they said property, they meant property. Stop reinterpreting.
100% true. You're the Justice Antonin Scalia of Bitcoin, which is a very big compliment in my opinion. I mean, obviously the man had his problems, but he.
Yeah, well, I'm not into sort of judges who make law. I mean, they're in a wrong position.
Yeah.
I mean, their job is to basically
right
to make sure that the words are interpreted correctly, that the rules are followed. I mean, go back to letting juries actually be there. I mean, we've gotten rid of juries in civil trials in the UK, and I think that's wrong. And there's a lot of push in the US to get rid of them as well, which I think is wrong.
Yeah,
juries
they really are.
The will of the people is.
I mean, it's one of the layers of protection from unjust laws. Is jury nullification. The concept that the jury can just nullify the law and say we're not going to convict somebody over this. And like mass disobedience cannot really be countered by a central authority. If this is like,
totally agree.
Okay, I'm about to get off on another tangent about how slavery actually ended, and it was by basically state nullification of federal law. But we probably don't have time for that. But again, thank you so much for your contribution to society and the world. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me. And I hope people find this really enjoyable listen. And I hope they keep tuning in because I want to have more conversations with more people. And eventually I'll start lapping them around and talking with some of the same people again. And I hope I'll talk to you as many times as you'll talk to me.
Well, I'll get back to that boring use case that everyone seems to ignore, which is micro payments, small casual payments, electronic cash.
I appreciate your diligence in that because that's what I'm interested in. So this is Greg Bledsoe for the Building Blocks podcast. Thank you so much. All right. So stop my recordings. Thanks so much. Really, really did have an enjoyable conversation. I hope it was Thank you for listening. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, as well as like and share Block Builder Labs content on both platforms. You can find me at BodgerLegas on Twitter and tip me at BodgerLegas on Handcash if you feel so inclined. Let's go build.